I'm M Mastrelli. I'm with IBM Blockchain Ecosystem. So that's anytime you hear about partners or startups, that's my job to help them integrate with IBM's ecosystem and blockchain. We have an esteemed panel here today to talk about blockchain and supply chain, some of the challenges and the hurdles, how to get over them. I will turn it over, starting with Susanne, working my way towards Eileen. Just quick introduction, and we'll jump in. Thanks, everybody, for being here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susanne Somerville. I'm head of Pharma Solutions at Chronicled. We're working to create a suite of products to help set up and manage blockchain ecosystems and networks. And one of our big projects is MetaLedger, a network for the pharmaceutical industry to track and trace prescription medicine.
Hi, everybody. My name is Daniel Goldstein. I run the engineering group in Emergent technology, focusing on responsible gold and G-Coin. We are working on a supply chain for gold that is going to be responsibly sourced and fully trackable to the source, and using that pipeline to basically mint or create a gold-backed token.
And hi, everyone. Eileen, Lowry. I lead our blockchain garages globally. Garages you can equate with basically an innovation hub where we really help our clients understand what blockchain is all about, how it's going to help them solve their business problems, and build that first implementation. We have 8 different locations around the world, and one here within walking distance in San Francisco.
That sounded like an invite.
It does.
San Francisco Blockchain Garage.
Yes.
Love it.
In Galvanize.
In Galvanize. So let's talk a little bit about supply chain technology. Been around for a while, it's not new, but can we just jump around a little bit on emerging technology? Why blockchain for supply chain specifically?
Yes, so we, in the world of gold, the problem of responsibly sourced gold, just like in the diamond industry, there is basically gold that is not sourced in ethical ways, using child labor or slavery or all the bad things you can imagine. And the different players in the gold industry don't have really a centralized place where they can track the source of the gold. It's kind of like ironic, but we're using a decentralized solution to solve a problem of centralization. We needed a solution where different players can participate in contributing their information, specifically around transfer of custody of the gold in its various stages of manufacturing, all the way to the vault, and blockchain was simply perfect for that use case. The transfer of custody, the distributed nature, the trust of the players, so it just worked well.
Yeah, and I think that's one great example. There's actually, when you think about supply chain, it applies to just about every industry. At IBM, we've been working with Everledger around diamond tracking, and at the same point in time, you can think about it in the industry from a food safety standpoint, the work that we've been doing to really minimize the food outbreaks, whether it be from disease or death, quite frankly, when it comes to food contamination. So really having the ability to track food throughout its life cycle, from the distributor to the packaging companies down to the retailers, and our work with Walmart and 10 other participants there. It also extends into the pharmaceutical world, which Susan is well versed in, as well as energy when you think about the supply chain from an energy standpoint, and as well just really every industry across. And there is in most cases, then it becomes the thought of, is this a technology following that we're just instituting into issues, but really at the end of the day, there are things that are going on in every industry, whether it be regulatory changes, persistent problems that have existed for decades, and really blockchain has become that spear, that tipping point to really making a change in many of these industries.
Nice. Can I ask a follow-up? How did you decide on using a blockchain technology or a protocol or a platform? Which ones? Maybe you just want to talk a little bit about that, and what was your decision-making process? Could be Eileen, could be Dan.
Daniel.
Yeah.
So I think that the first thing to decide is whether blockchain is appropriate at all. I think we see too many cases where use cases, they're forced into the blockchain. So I think having picking the technology is saying, I'm going to go with blockchain, that's the first step. Not everybody, actually, that's one of the pitfalls there. Once that was decided that it's appropriate, actually, a good use case, it's actually required to be on something like a blockchain, we had multiple other requirements that we had to follow. We had a need for high throughput for our coin itself. We had a need for privacy of the data for the supply chain. Not everybody wanted everything to be open there. we had a need to keep cost down. I mean, probably contrary to popular belief, the margins on gold are very low. The gold, all of the process of manufacturing gold, the margin of profit is very low. So we couldn't afford to do something that is too expensive. So putting all of that together, and on top of that, we wanted to do a little bit more, a little bit beyond just proofs of transfer of custody. We want to have some logic on different business processes in the supply chain. So putting all that together, the technology we chose was to go with Ethereum, basically a fork of Ethereum, and more specifically, we went with Quorum as our chosen platform. One of the main reasons for that was name recognition of the platform. And we also looked, this is important, what is the contribution of the community to the development of their platform at the time. That changes all the time, but it's a good measure.
Yeah, I think, Danny, you brought up a great point just around what is the business problem that's at hand, and not just then picking a technology. Again, as I kind of mentioned, looking at what is happening in the industry, whether it be regulatory changes, and that being an opportune time to take advantage of blockchain, whether it's the Drug Supply Chain Security Act and sort of the nefarious element of what technology should we use given that the requirements that are coming out, or take just the simple problem of the issues as it relates to when a food outbreak occurs, how long does it take, and the fact that you have so many people that do fall ill or perhaps even have death, and what technology is going to help really create that trust in that system amongst the different players to really reduce those problems that exist. And from our vantage point, obviously from the very beginning, we began working with many other companies to spark the Hyperledger project, which you heard from Brian earlier today around, and really continuing to have that ecosystem of players, now over 250 different members contributing many different industries, to really have that platform that will allow you to use blockchain for any industry, and getting those requirements from those different industries and from different size companies, whether they're small or large, really understanding what are their requirements in order to scale out a blockchain for business. Yeah,
let's just jump. Susanne, I want to talk, we talked a little bit earlier in the green room about incentives. Can you talk a little bit about, incentives, and how did you incent, or are you incenting clients to join these blockchain platforms? What's your secret sauce?
Yeah, well, I think Eileen referred to it. In the pharmaceutical industry, we've had the benefit of government regulation. The Drug Supply Chain Security Act is requiring pharmaceutical companies and the trading partners all the way to the pharmacies to effectively figure out ways to play together. By 2023, there needs to be an electronic interoperable system in this country that allows the track and trace of prescription medicine. So we were given sort of a gift, and companies take protecting the public actually quite seriously, and so there's been a lot of work on helping implement portions of that law that are required sooner, as well as looking to 2023. So the regulation was the gift. What I will say, which I think is going to be an interesting dynamic with blockchain networks as they emerge, is that now that we've got those first solutions underway and ready to launch hopefully here shortly this year, they're now asking us to look at other use cases. And those use cases, maybe it might have been harder to incentivize companies to come together and create standards on how they want to operate by themselves, but by having the platform available and ready, I think it's going to precipitate even more use cases. And I think that's what's going to emerge in blockchain networks as they now become established.
Well, this is good on networks getting established. And a follow-up, can we talk about benefits? I know we talk a lot about building things, but can you talk about some of the real benefits that you've seen specific to supply chain and blockchains?
Yeah, so I think, and this goes back to Daniel's question of why we chose blockchain. If you go to a pharmacy today, you believe that that drug isn't counterfeit, but you actually don't know. By having actually a blockchain solution that can verify ownership of that drug all the way from the authenticating manufacturer, we can actually get to a place, aspirational in the future, where that drug at pharmacies is known to not be counterfeit. So I would say that's one bit of it. From an industry perspective, I think people are looking at a lot of efficiencies. They have multi-company processes that require, let's say, contract verification, and it's very complicated, and there's a lot of validation and rework for mistakes that are made. I think a lot of those things can prove to be huge efficiency gains for industries as well.
Yeah, and I would just add, when you think about the food safety problem that we're solving, today in the U.S., about 600 million people fall ill every year from some sort of food illness. And if you're able to reduce the time it takes from 7 days down to 2 seconds of when and understanding where product recall actually might need to occur, you can think about how many fewer people might fall ill from a food illness and therefore be able to be more productive at work, be at school. The list kind of goes on as far as what the potential upside might be from a consumer standpoint.
I think in the gold industry, I mean, supply chain in general, I think that every individual that participates in the chain, every company, organization, they're pretty good about self-regulating. They do what they do well, and they don't try to cheat anybody. But then in the chain itself, the handoffs, the control over the source, and then knowing what happened 3 steps up or 3 steps down the chain, that is a problem. So you can, in the case of gold, you may get gold, and you can prove that it's gold, that you can prove the weight, but how do you know that it was responsibly sourced? With all the good players, you'll have to jump from player to player to prove their own step until you get to the mine and say, okay, this is responsibly sourced. The blockchain and the specific solution gives the ability for everybody to contribute their ethically executed step in the chain, but then link them all together in a distributed way.
Nice. No, I love great answers from all. So let's talk a little bit about where you see blockchain and supply chain near to midterm. I know, Susanne, you were chomping at the bit here in the green room, so let's start with you. Where do you really see blockchain and supply chain mid to near term?
Yeah, so right now, I think the environment, and this is sort of what we expected, last year was the beginning of piloting. I think there's still a lot of piloting taking place. A lot of people have really great ideas of applications for blockchain, and it's really great to see companies investing in seeing how they can apply it. I think there's also, along with that piloting, I think companies are using this as an opportunity to learn and gain some internal expertise, maybe not to do the blockchain work themselves, but to become discerning and smarter to be able to ask questions in the future. I'd like to believe in the next 6 months, 12 months, there will be commercial networks set up. Actually, Daniel already has one, so growing networks. And then from that network, I honestly think people will start to be able to, I will say lay people like myself, will be able to look and say, what did they do? And there's a real use case with a real purpose that they can identify. I think there's still a lot of people who don't understand what to use blockchain for, and it's still muddled in that pilot space. So once real blockchains emerge and people can see, oh, I have something just like that, will that actually drive other industry groups to come together and establish networks? So my expectation is it's going to roll sort of piece by piece as people see what's actually being put in place.
I agree with that. That's specifically the area that I think it's going to go. Right now, we're seeing multiple supply chain groups putting together either consortiums or chains that specialize in one supply chain. But every supply chain is at the beginning of the next one. So in the gold industry, we get the gold to the vault, but then it can go into manufacturing of watches or jewelry or electronics. Everyone here has a cell phone that has quite a bit of gold in it. Do you know where that gold came from? So the linking of the different supply chains into a supply chain of supply chains and bridging between different networks, I think that that's the next technological challenge. And this is not unlike what I heard in multiple presentations today, the bridging of networks for exchanging tokens across networks. It's a very similar use case.
Yeah, and I think just to pick up on both of your points, certainly a lot of pilots being performed, a lot of experiments in 2017, a lot of things moving into pilot this year, certain aspects from an IBM standpoint moving into production, whether it be our food trust solution or also our global trade digitization. And then to pick up on what Daniel is talking about, really then the ability for the information that's relevant in one network to be used to benefit yet another network. And so when you think about having to track an apple from one part of the world to another, and what's the financial component associated with moving that apple throughout the world, taking the elements of our global trade work with Maersk in terms of where something may be shipped, the documentation related to that, and then plug in also a trade finance network associated with the financing piece And if we're talking about perhaps money moving around as well, take the work that we're doing with Stellar around WorldWire and the cross-border payments, and you can, it's a very grand vision, but you can imagine how pieces of information from all of these different networks will help and benefit one another in terms of whether it be speeding up the movement of a good, creating financing channels that didn't exist before, and reducing the risk associated with this entire transaction that today we kind of take advantage of, in the sense of we kind of know where bits and pieces are, but we don't really have a comprehensive view of that world.
Well, okay, so follow up to that then. How does that impact the various existing players? All of this change, it's going to impact the various players in the system here. So any thoughts or predictions backed by gold?
Hopefully it's going to primarily impact the bad players. So, and this has to do with also attracting participants. If the solution works well, it's easy to use, and it shows that there is a clear benefit in being in it, meaning you can prove that you're not a bad player, then it's easier to exclude all the bad players. So you cannot guarantee that. You can guarantee that all the bad players are out there, maybe even if you cannot guarantee that everything that you're doing is 100% perfect.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think to give a concrete example of that, if you look at the supply chain of an ad, today when a large brand will spend $1, at the end of the day, about 40 cents of that really runs through the pipe, and so a publisher, is looking to is expected to deliver that $1 worth of advertising, and at the end of the day, there is this fraud that happens throughout that entire life cycle of the supply chain for an ad, and there's always discrepancies between what really was seen, what was paid for when it comes to a campaign, and so there are many actors in the middle of that supply chain. Some of them end up being bad actors, some of them really at the end of the day are providing a certain service that I think you're going to see certain elements of what people do in that supply chain get pushed, in other ends of the spectrum. And so you will try to eliminate many of those bad actors, and at the same point in time, you're going to see some of the profit pools actually shift around with those different actors in a supply chain, whether it be, again, in the advertising industry, the pharmaceutical industry, pick your industry.
Yeah, I would say what's interesting is we have people who work in the pharma supply chain who are participating because they're also trying to anticipate how their business model is going to have to shift with blockchain. So they want to be in on the conversation. They certainly want to protect their current business interests, but they're smart enough to know that the way their business works may shift. In our network as well, we're offering our specifications and software for free to those who want to participate in our network, and that includes the service providers who currently offer IT solutions to the industry. And it's going to be really interesting to see companies that are based on, I would say, centralized services, having a chance to play in a decentralized space, and how all of them, frankly, are going to have to think about the shift in their business model. And I think it'll be really interesting to see companies that are based on centralized and proprietary, how they will want to choose to participate, and how they will figure out how to shift their model. Because I'm obviously the people here, I'm sold on blockchain and decentralized, so if it's coming, what will that mean for these central proprietary solutions?
In the case of assets that are tracked on a supply chain, on blockchain, that are fungible, there is another added value. Once you digitize the tracked asset, like gold, on a supply chain, you can track its full provenance. It opens the door to create a G-coin, for instance, in our case, which is a token that is backed by the gold that comes through the supply chain, specific categories of gold. And that it goes beyond the proof of saying, I have the gold. You can track it all the way to the mine. You can see who's in custody of that gold, and basically you created out of a physical, you created a digital asset that you can track and tokenize.
And I think to just further on Susan's point when it comes to business models, a lot of people experimenting with this technology, their initial intake is to look for efficiencies and how something might work today, and sort of that is on your cost line or your expense line. But I think where things get really interesting is when you start looking at what are those new business models, when you start seeing shifts in how players interact with one another, what they want to take on, that's when you really start to get into the interesting elements of how do I actually grow my top line? What are the new ways in which I am going to interact? And a lot of that is dependent upon what are you setting up when it comes to a network. Are you talking about a very public, open network where anyone can join? Maybe there's a small transaction fee. Are you talking about, a members-only club where you have to be, in it to really benefit from it? And if you're on the outside, you're not going to be able to be part of that network. Perhaps you have sort of a mix of this public and private world where, again, that might drive even different incentives as well as a different business model altogether. And I think those are the things that you really need to think through. A lot of people sort of jump onto the excitement of using blockchain, but really thinking through what kind of network am I, participating in? What is then going to drive that business behavior at the end of the day, and what is the incentives?
And adding one more thing, it's kind of a fun conversation. So Chronicled's business interest is to be the network manager, right? We want to run the network for the pharma industry. And when we've talked to other service providers and we've had discussions of how it's all going to work, they're like, well, you do this. And we're like, actually, we're not going to run the software. Like, you can't talk to us. You're going to need to talk to all the people out there running the software. And so it's even mentally getting your head around how this is going to operate differently. I think once we have, again, some live solutions, I think people will be able to do the whole case study. But it's really going to twist people's minds, right? Not just these industries, but all the participants who impact them. So I'm kind of excited.
And you bring up a great point, too, there in terms of you had to get people still around a table to talk through it. And really the governance, which is another kind of popular buzzword, but really at the end of the day, decisions get made around a table. But once you have made some sort of set of rules, then you can digitize those rules, and you can really refer back to them to help expedite how can you progress a network so that if you're going to be part of this club, whether again if it's a private permissioned club or if it's going to be a public club tied to something that might be permissioned, the rules are there for people to either join or decide that it's not for them.
And also, I think we need to kind of like take our time with these players, especially in all the industries that are already set in their ways, and in some cases there may be compromises needed. So, for instance, I'm almost certain that in a year from now, they realize that their need for privacy is not as big as they thought it is. So, I mean, how much a mine produces is pretty much public knowledge, but nobody wanted that to be disclosed on the blockchain. So we had to build technology solutions around that. So that's a kind of compromise that is easy to make, but will gives a lot of confidence to the players that are joining, even if they're going to change their mind later. At least hope.
Good. Can we talk next steps? What's happening with you, next steps, and how can our ecosystem colleagues join you?
Yeah, so from an IBM standpoint, again, we've got a number of networks that are, further along and some that are in their early stages. For the ones further along, like our IBM Food Trust solution, our global trade solution, it's really now about attracting and onboarding other members and participants into those opportunities. And that's really where, going out on our website and connecting with various folks from our teams to really get onboarded and understand what the requirements are. For others that are in the earlier stages, next steps are really getting something from off the ground, taking it from really that experimental phase into a pilot. And the group of panelists were on earlier, talking about some of the security requirements that you need to think through, some of the production grade elements from a business standpoint. What is that business model? And really thinking through those so that you can take an experiment and really progress that into a pilot.
So we are plan right now is to continue to grow our network, to get more participants in the gold industry to join as participants in the supply chain. There are not that many, but we want to get all of them, the responsible ones. That's on one side of the supply chain. On the other side, to continue to grow our GCon platform, open it to all developers to come and develop the apps on top of that platform. This is still, there are two sides to this platform, the supply chain and the commercial side. And I think that's another thing about the supply chain solutions. They're always going to have two sides to them where ownership, this is something we didn't cover, but primarily the supply chain is about transfer of custody, where commercial is about transfer of ownership, and they're not necessarily the same thing. People confuse them many times. So.
Yeah, so for us, in the Drug Supply Chain Security Act, starting next November, so November 2019, all drugs returned to wholesalers will need to be verified before they're allowed to be resold again. In the United States, about 2% of all drugs are returned and resold. So it's a volume issue that you can't just pick up the phone and do a manual verification. So our solution for that is really driving the industry to come together on a network solution, and our plan is to launch in October. We're testing right now. We are very interested in service providers who operate currently for the pharma industry participating, and certainly they should contact us if they want to be part of it. Manufacturers and wholesalers who are involved can certainly contact us as well. Again, our intention is that we're not running the software, so we will pass them on to service providers or show them how they can set up the solution for themselves so that we can get that network started. I would say, looking a little further ahead, there are other solutions that we're already being asked to put on the same platform, so I think that's the dream and the aspiration. And don't quote me, but I would love to think 6 to 12 months from now, can we start having deeper conversations with third-party developers who have other protocol ideas that can then sit on the same MetaLedger platform so that the industry has one really solid network of trading partners and the processes that are associated with them.
Yeah, and I think, Susan, you bring up a great point in terms of just different types of people and when to get started. I think there's always a time to get started, regardless of what you're trying to do, to really get an understanding of either what's going on in the industry, but also how the technology works. Again, you may not be the one that has to build the application. You may end up becoming a participant in the network, but getting familiar with how is this technology going to solve the business problem that you are hearing being solved or on its way to being solved using this technology is a great way to really expedite that whole process. I think a lot of people have been dipping their toe in, but then they kind of dip the toe back out. But kind of dipping the toe in and really understanding then what role you're going to play in the network is really important. And a very easy way to do that, from what we've seen with working with developers, is to have the simple developer tools at your fingertips. So from a Hyperledger standpoint, getting started with Hyperledger Composer, using our starter plan to just very quickly get up and spin up a network, understand what does it mean to actually transfer assets, digitize the asset, interact with another player. And while that seems very trivial, at the end of the day, that is going to give you an understanding of how this technology can actually help you solve a business problem. But more importantly, then if you're able to prove those points, it's much easier down the line when you're ready to join because you already have the understanding of it.
Yeah. 2 minutes. I want to do questions from the audience. Someone's got a question. Yes? No? Yes, sir. Here in the middle.
I was going to ask, I'm not able to return my drugs, so how do people return their drugs?
So what actually happens, you're correct, you don't get to return your drugs. But at a pharmacy level, if someone fat-fingered an order that was supposed to be 10 and they did 100 by mistake, those 90 will get sent back to the wholesaler. That's one reason. There's a variety of reason codes. So it's going to be between pharmacy and wholesaler that return takes place. And one other thing, sadly, the law requires unit-level serialization on the manufacturing unit. So your little amber vial isn't going to have unit-level serialization yet. Though a lot of people are asking us, that would take a whole other set of standards to transform from the prescription medicine box down to a prescription level. But ideally, that's where we'd want to get to. But if any of you have a prescription box in your hand, some now, but it should be accelerating after November this year, look for a unique serial number. It's pretty exciting. All around the world, actually, these laws are taking place.
Love it. Yes, I see a hand in the middle. And were you stretching? That was a wave off. He was stretching. You, sir.
So you have all these transaction histories distributed in a normal blockchain, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say that we have this blockchain.
40 seconds.
We later find out that the physical act was fraudulent, right? So there's, in the real world, someone lied about what happened. Things have gone on in this blockchain and you've added new blocks. You can no longer go back and easily edit what happened in the past. How do you deal with that?
Can I comment on that? So I think that I was thinking about it when you were answering, because there are two challenges in the supply chain. One is the transfer of custody, kind of like this inventory management, but the other one is the tamper-proof aspect of the asset itself, the way it got digitized and the way that you confirm that what is there is what you have on the blockchain. And one solution, at least in the gold industry, it's easier, is to guarantee that all the custodians are trustworthy and as long as they keep the eyes on the asset, you know that it is valid. To answer directly your question is, can you change? Obviously, you cannot change what happened in the past, but you are able to identify quicker that something happened, and then take the physical asset out of circulation, be able to track it and take it out of circulation.
And I think more complicated answer, right? It does depend on what the physical asset is and what the characteristics of that asset might be. From a diamond standpoint, we're tracking 19 different characteristics in order to identify that the diamond that is then digitally represented, is the same diamond. But you take and pick a different physical asset, like a piece of art. How can you identify the paints, say, from when that physical asset was initially registered to how it has moved over time, and using sort of image capture and capabilities from an AI standpoint to then continue to identify that picture is the same picture that it was. So it really is going to vary based on what is the physical asset and what are those unique characteristics. But like anything, garbage in, garbage out. So you do need to be able to have those unique identifiers.
We got to wrap it up. This is our time. Find them off stage. Dan has gold on him, I think. Maybe. I'm kidding. You don't. That was a joke. No, maybe. He might. You didn't hear it from me. Thank you, everybody, so much. Thanks to our beautiful panelists. Have a great day.
Thanks.